Hi there and welcome back to my channel, My Road to Wealth, where I give you tips and strategies to help you secure your financial future, covering everything from budgeting tips to investments and even property. So be sure to like and subscribe so I can keep pushing content to share my road, my journey, but also sharing my experiences to help others reach their financial goals. In this video, I'm going to be covering emergency funds. So be sure to stick through to the end as we cover how to get started, how to do it well, but how this can really revolutionize your lives and how it can only be the beginning to building those habits. Please remember, I'm not a financial advisor, so please carry out your own research. If you're unsure, consult a financial professional who's aware of your circumstances, because I am not a financial advisor. So what is an emergency fund? So an emergency fund, it's a pot of money or savings that you set aside for an unexpected expense or emergency. So let's just say something happens with your car or medical bills, or let's just say you lose your job as sort of a worst case scenario. An emergency fund is there to essentially help you in those situations where, let's just say, you've paid your bills, you've paid for certain other things as well, but now you've got an unexpected expense where you're going to try and have to figure out where that money's coming from, or even worse, you might have to pick up debt to handle it. So with an emergency fund, after creating a budget and trying to cut down on unnecessary expenses, it's probably considered one of the first steps in terms of managing your money. So how do you get started? So an emergency fund, the general rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. So let's say your rent or your mortgage, electric, water, your food, everything you couldn't live without. This is something that obviously the rule, it's flexible, it will vary massively from person to person. So let's just say if one person was working in a relatively safe, high security sort of job, let's just say you're salaried, where you know exactly what money is going to come in. But in general, let's just say, using that rule, if you've got $1,200 a month in terms of living expenses, you might want to look at $3,600 to $4,800 in your emergency fund. So that's $3,600 to $4,800. Again, this will vary from person to person. It's all what you're comfortable with, what your personal situation's like. So it's not to say if you are in one, that's best for you. But in comparison, you might be starting a new business, starting a new venture, you might be freelance, or you might work in a commission-based job where you might want to look at doing sort of $6,000 or $7,200 a month. Well, no, not a month, but in your emergency fund for those expenses. That's not to say, again, that you can't do more, can't do less. If you want to do 5 to 6 months and you work in something salaried and quite comfortable, it's all down to your preferences and sort of what you expect or might not expect to come up. So to really get the ball rolling, what you'll want a plan. So in terms of how much do you actually need or want to have in your emergency fund to start off with? What sort of cushion you want based on your circumstances, based on if you do see anything coming up, if your car's having some issues at the minute, or you'll just need to have an idea of what is going to be your number in your emergency fund. And then secondly, how much can you afford to put into it each month? What you'll need a budget, so you'll know exactly what your living expenses are. But what your budget will allow you to do is see how much you can also spare on a month-to-month basis. If you do need a bit of a hand with that, I've got 2 videos which I'll link somewhere, either down in the description or will crop up at the end of the video, but they do take you through this step by step. So how can you maximize your chances of being successful with an emergency fund? Tip number 1, only use it for emergencies. I know it seems very obvious, I shouldn't really have to explain it, but some people would struggle to constitute or think about what would class as an emergency to use that money for. In general, for a majority of people, it would be sort of losing your job, it would be car bills, it would be medical bills, stuff that you don't necessarily budget for on a month-to-month basis that you obviously need. It's all about thinking as well. So if you are having car issues, is it really worth using a full emergency fund, let's say, to put a deposit on a luxury car? But just a handy little tip there, set boundaries. So from the very start, you want to know exactly what would have you using that money and what you wouldn't use it for. By setting those boundaries, you essentially limit those chances of using the money for something that isn't an emergency. Tip number 2, make sure it is safe and it's accessible. So in general, the thinking is to keep it in a high interest savings account. So there will be some instant access, there will be some easy access savings accounts out there, but you really want to make sure it's a high interested account where you're getting as much bang for your buck as possible, where you're getting as much money in interest as possible. But you want to make sure there's no restrictions on that account. So you don't want there to be a limit on how much money you're putting in every month. So as an example, obviously if you did want to put in more on a certain month, you can do that, but definitely no restrictions on taking money out. So with some types of accounts, you have to give, let's say, 3 months notice, 6 months notice, or a certain amount of withdrawals a year. But you don't want those restrictions because they're there for emergencies, and obviously you don't expect an emergency, so you can't anticipate how much you're going to need that money. Tip number 3, you want to work slow and steady. So with regards to it, you want to build those good money habits. You don't want to be in a situation where you put a couple of wedges of money into the account and then you stop there or you use it, but you want to build those money habits. They say in general, it's better to make lower monthly payments and keep it consistent than it is making a couple of high payments towards an emergency fund. Because it will build those really good money habits, and then once your emergency fund does reach a point where it's built up, it's money you don't necessarily expect to be there, because every month you take it out and it comes out. So when that emergency fund's built up, it's money you used to not having, and it means you can put it in other places towards other things, such as investments, and again build on your financial position. Another tip with going slow and steady is you can set up a standing order or like an automatic recurring transfer. So every month, just after you get paid, it's basically direct debiting yourself, where you have the money taken out of one bank account of yours and put into another bank account of yours. So it's kind of an expense, which obviously it's not an expense, but it's money that automatically moves out, which you don't have to do anything with and you can forget about basically. Another tip with sort of being slow and steady is you don't really want to have an account where you have a card as well. So with whatever account you select, you don't want to have a card for it, a debit card or any form of card. If you do, keep it at home. Don't keep it in your wallet or purse. You don't want to use it. And my final tip, my fourth tip, is to review and reflect. So you want to do this on a regular basis. Your income, every now and then it's going to change. Your expenses are always going to change. They're going to evolve on a month-to-month basis. So whatever budget you've got sort of put together, or whatever you've got sort of written down to help you with your emergency fund, that'll always need changing and adjusting. And then your requirements and your situations are always going to change as well. So stuff to consider is, do you have something coming up? So although it's an emergency fund, you know if you're having a lot of issues with your boiler as an example, and you know that potentially you might have to get a new one relatively soon. Within your review and reflect, if you reach, eventually you'll reach your goal, you want to see how far away you are from that goal. If you do have to use your emergency fund, you have to get it to a place where it's topped back up. But also, when you're starting to reach near your goal, in terms of like having something saved for your emergency fund, what are your next steps? What are you next going to do with your leftover money? So you might be asking yourself, what does this mean for you? What is the point? First point being you're prepared. So your necessary bills are covered. So let's just say your boiler goes kabang. A new boiler's might be around £2,500. Most people aren't going to have that money lying around. So what would you do? Would you get a loan? So you're stressing, you're trying to find a loan for a new boiler just to keep your house warm. Are you going to borrow from friends or family? Are you going to put them through that stress, that strain? It's a lot of hassle to have to deal with. With an emergency fund, this is something you wouldn't have to deal with. You wouldn't have to worry. There'd be no urgency. The money would be there. It means you're more financially secure. It means you've got less stress. There's a whole host of benefits to an emergency fund. You've also got your money habits built. So you'll reach a point where your emergency fund, it's all topped up, it's built up. You're going to have extra money every single month that you're not expecting because you're used to it going into that emergency fund. Suddenly, saving for a holiday or saving for a house deposit or saving for a car, it becomes a lot easier, or even putting the money towards investments. With your emergency fund, bills are easier to pay. You won't miss, let's just say, a loan payment or a credit card payment or a car payment. That's something you don't miss. If you don't miss it, that won't affect your credit score. If you're in situations you don't need to borrow money as much, which again means your credit score goes up. If your credit score goes up, if you need to borrow money for a loan, a mortgage or for a car, the price to borrow money is going to be cheaper. You're going to have more choice available to you because the banks trust you, because your credit score's higher. You'll be able to choose from more places that obviously lend the money. And if that's the case, prices are more likely to be cheaper. If prices are cheaper, then obviously you'll have more money to again save every single month purely because your credit score is higher. You'll have more money to save. Again, it's more money you can invest and put into things. And when money's invested, it can grow more. It's absolutely crazy how much of an impact this would have. So this is where I'd say if you're saving for a house, if you're saving for a car, if you want to retire early, whatever your goals are, this is the start to begin really setting yourself up to reach those goals, to meet and exceed what you want to achieve in life. I really hope you enjoyed my video. I wanted to thank you for making it to the end in what will hopefully be a kickstart in helping you achieve your financial goals. Hopefully it's been very informative and maybe also a little bit inspirational and motivating to watch. So I'm going to link a couple of videos at the end which should help you towards an emergency fund in terms of putting a budget together and how much money you could be setting aside towards your emergency fund each month. But be sure to like and subscribe so this can reach many more people to come. But for now, thank you once again for joining me and I'll see you next week.